I think that will be something that when the history books get written, we will be remembered as the generation that did the worst to children ever. It wasn't enough. It wasn't simply enough to advocate for abortion all the way up to life, right? That wasn't enough. No, what we wanted to do is allow kids to mutilate themselves with exactly zero life experience, zero knowledge of human sexuality, and on top of that, to boot, we're going to hide it from their parents, right? When parents drop their kids off for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 hours a day with these people, they never in a million years dream that they're dropping them off with monsters. They think they're dropping them off with people who are absolutely committed in their soul to protecting them. They never would dream that they're dropping them off for people who are going to indoctrinate them to values or virtues that are absolutely antithetical to what they are wanting their children to carry on as their legacy, as their, which is to say the parents' legacy within the children. And I think that that's going to be remembered again as one of the greatest monstrosities that humans have ever done to their own children in the history of man.
Welcome to The Furrowed Brow with Jeffrey Kipler.
If you're enjoying The Furrowed Brow, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really like it, consider a donation through Patreon. I'm a one-man show. I really enjoy making this. All of the support is greatly appreciated. And the more support I can get, more podcasts and time I can make and time I can carve out for this. So thanks a lot and hope you enjoy the episode. Yeah, let's just get this going then. I got a little intro for you here.
Right.
Today's guest goes by Athenian Stranger. He's an avid weightlifter, student of history and philosophy, and commentator on the modern zeitgeist. I became familiar with Athenian through Twitter. I became familiar with Athenian through Twitter and his commentary on Spaces. He's got a Telegram board, Underground University, where he posts his thoughts and readings, and is working on a website. He has a voice that will resonate with this audience. Athenian, welcome to The Furrowed Brow.
All right. Thank you so much, my friend. Really honored to be here. Appreciate this.
So let me start off by asking you a little bit, because I only know you from your how you think and how you speak, and you're one of the more articulate, measured people I've ever had the pleasure of listening to on Spaces. Are you formally trained?
So I do have I completed the highest levels of education, and then the world went crazy. So,
Okay, what do you mean by the world went crazy?
Well, just the way in which the left has taken over everything. You can't be involved in academia if you want to be intellectually honest anymore. I mean, it's been this way for a long time, but once 2016 happened, especially with Trump being elected, and you just saw the way that everyone went crazy. Most people have no idea how left academia already is. I mean, they're used to hearing things like, the indoctrination universities and things like that. But it's so much worse than people could imagine. So I've always been over on the right here like this. And so I was never too much of a good fit in academia anyway. And plus, I don't like to be dishonest about my own principles and opinions on things when they enter the realm of politics. And so it's just, I've always just been a kind of, I don't know if I want to say a black sheep or just an outcast, or just, it's just a weird fit, me in traditional academia. So I do a lot better, here, like on Twitter, and with people that, you can just be honest with, because you can't be honest, in academia and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. I mean, I was still, I would say, a leftist to a greater than lesser degree. Probably when Trump got elected, I thought both Hillary and Trump were abhorrent, but but I believed the stuff like Russiagate, all of the Michael Steele memos. I was like, oh, there's probably merit for this. He's probably in Putin's pocket. And then come to find out, as time went on, that, oh, okay, this stuff was made up, right? Like, oh, okay, the Michael Steele was bought off by the Clinton campaign. They used that stuff to lie to FISA, to get warrants to spy on a presidential candidate, which is, I'm reasonably sure, without precedent. And it's like nobody seemed to update their priors based upon this stuff. Like, wait, what's going on here, right? Like, and that to me was the, like, among other things, was the insane part. Like, people weren't seeing that the state was being used in such a massive capacity to go after a duly elected president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a micro view of what I run across in philosophy all the time. And I think it's always been like this. Is what happens is that where people like you and I, we see that stuff and we're like, well, okay, wait a minute. I need to go back and reassess, my prior ideas on this. But what happens in the study of philosophy is that, and it's just because this is how most people are by nature, people just become too invested in their own opinions. Human pride is a powerful drug, and most people would rather ride out the wave of criticism of being called a hypocrite rather than ever even admit that they were wrong or anything like that, because they're just too invested in things. They close their mind. And they would just as soon block you or disown you or something like that, and never have to deal with you than account for the fact that they were wrong about things. And so, yeah.
So let me ask you, what are you trying to do? Did I accurately in my introduction describe your work well enough? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. I came to Twitter roughly December of 2020, January 2021. And originally, I didn't know anyone here. I was just a tiny little account. And what I had wanted to do was just provide academic resources. That's all I wanted to do, and just share knowledge. And I I had already had issues on other social media because, I had begun to be more outspoken and say, look, this is insane what these students are going around saying. It's insane what most people are running around believing. But that, so I was very angry about all that. But being angry about these things gets you nowhere. And except, I watched my followers on different social media just dwindle down to nothing. Because I was so mad about stuff. I was like, what the fuck is going wrong with people? And so, you just lose all your followers, and then I get, you get booted because, you finally say, well, whatever. When you tell someone what you really want them to go do,
right.
With their stupid ass opinions. And so I came to Twitter and I was like, okay, I'm not going to be political. I'm just going to provide content. But, everything is political. Philosophy is political, right? Because, I mean, when you're talking about the nature of truth, that has political consequences. And I was fortunate enough to cross paths with a few just legends in the orbit, and they helped me in ways that I would never have been able to accomplish anything I've done on my own. So there was that kind of happenstance there. And next thing you knew, my account started getting bigger, but I never changed my mission. My mission was always to just provide as much free academic resources to people who were like-minded and just wanted to see, to learn, right? They wanted to learn. And so that's the motivation behind the Underground University website. It's just a place to go to find templates for reading the great books, which are the best editions of them, right? What are the best translations? What's the order I should read them in? All that kind of stuff is there. I have a Substack there, just a tiny little Substack. And then with the Telegram, what I have is a very convenient way to share anonymously and very free various rare PDFs to other people, so they don't have to bother with, once you're out of the university, it's very difficult to obtain journal essays and things like that because the universities have a lock on all these things, right? How
Yeah.
do you gain access to them? And if you try to buy them individually, I mean, you're looking sometimes at easily $40 per essay.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I share all that stuff for free there on Telegram. So people have access to all these things. And I'm just about to launch a new website where I have, because let me be perfectly clear, Underground University is not to be taken as anything political. I keep it as absolutely neutral as possible so that everyone can go there. Um, Now, with the website I'm about to launch with my spaces and things, archived all my spaces. I've got a great group of guys that are working with me on Twitter, or I should really say I'm working with them. And we're putting together this wonderful little community. And these are the kind of guys who all, like me, they've been educated to the absolute highest way you can go, PhD level, etc. Um, and in many cases, outright professors. And we provide introductory spaces, advanced spaces on all kinds of topics. And I'm putting that all together on the website that I'll launch soon, hopefully within the next week, at most 2 weeks. But that's really what my mission is there, is myself and a small group of my friends, we provide free academic resources to people who just want to learn. Now, that being said, we are very much of the right. Um, Probably most people would consider me of the far right, whatever that means anymore, because being far anything doesn't really mean anything anymore. Um, and so, of course, we like to have a little fun in our spaces. We like to have a little fun trolling these kinds of things. But for the most part, yeah, I mean we're there to provide a kind of a light in the darkness of all that's happened in academia. So yeah.
So, I mean, did you observe when like Brett Weinstein and I think it's Evergreen University, all of that stuff went down, and Jordan Peterson and the issues that he had?
I mean, I'm familiar with those things to an extent. Uh, I'm not too familiar with them because I'm just not that impressed with them as thinkers.
Okay.
They're these public intellectuals that really think very highly of themselves. Apparently, they've done some good along the way. I think I remember listening to a few of Jordan Peterson's YouTube clips and thinking that this is pretty good. But then, if you really start attending to all the details, you're like, wait a minute, I'm not really sure. I don't know if these are good guys or not. I'm not really sure they're, uh, you know, fundamentally of the same principles as I am about a lot of this stuff. Peterson especially loves to attack the anons. Weinstein, I think, is just a flat out liar on many things
Pe-
about things.
Peterson definitely has. It's one of the stranger things in his entire repertoire I've found is that attacking of the anonymous folks. It's like it's one of his more divisive things that he's done that makes him a target for people that otherwise might be naturally allies for him.
Yeah, I just don't understand it, man. And
Yeah,
he's doubled and tripled and whatever down on it
yeah,
now so much that he's really done more damage than any good at this point that he ever did before. It's been rough seeing it, but I don't know. I mean, I know some people who knew him before he went really famous, and they said he's always kind of been like that. He's had that side to him that's not pleasant at all. So.
yeah. I've definitely I've listened to a lot of his lectures. I've listened to his entire biblical series. I've listened to I think a lot of the ideas that I've gotten for Nietzsche and various philosophers and whatnot. I got through listening to him, so I really appreciate his kind of his lectures and whatnot in that kind of space. His commentary on like mythology and psychology is pretty fascinating. Um, I find some of his political stuff has gotten quite weird though, many times.
Yeah,
I
there's no doubt that he's a really good speaker. It's very impressive listening to him speak, the way that he can juggle complex ideas very eloquently. That's impressive, and that's certainly something to aspire to. Um, and yeah, I've listened to some of his series on YouTube and stuff. A lot of those courses, and it can be fun. It can be fun. He gets he gets a few very important points about philosophy wrong. I remember listening to one he did on Nietzsche,
Hmm.
and I was like, well, wait a minute, that's not exactly correct. I think it was the concept of the shadow that he got wrong.
Oh, you Jungian shadows and whatnot. He does a lot on that, right?
Yeah, I think he might have been mixing up Jung and Nietzsche at one point.
Oh, okay.
So, but yeah, because I was like, wait a minute, that's not the shadow in Nietzsche. That might be the shadow in someone else, but that's not the shadow in Nietzsche.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, you guys are at a little bit of a different level with being able to pick apart the details.
Yeah, I don't really begrudge people when they get things wrong, because I mean, look, life is only so long, and all of us can only be experts in so much, right?
Yeah.
So there's not really any reason to necessarily bash people because they get a few things wrong. You can always appreciate, at least the things that they get right too. I've had to learn that, of course, with my various critics on Twitter. The human nature is such that people just look for things to just blow you up about, and just completely trash you altogether,
Oh
without
my
any
God, my
consideration.
my most popular Twitter comment was something about like the last commie in Japan being assassinated, and apparently I got the history slightly wrong. Everybody from the right loved it because it's thematically
Yeah,
was popular, and then all of these guys were like, "Well, there's actually a ton of communists in Japan, and he was a socialist," and I'm like, it went on for a week, 2 weeks, or something like that. That was
yeah,
happening. It was surreal to me because it's a very small account. I do not typically have like hundreds or thousands of people posting and commenting on my
right,
thread.
right, right. Yeah, that's funny. I one time, someone was criticizing me or something as not knowing what I was talking about, and I responded back with the equal amount of attack, but I had a typo in it, of course.
Right.
And you got to love those, right? When you're trying to defend yourself, saying, you're not dumb, and you have a typo in there. So
Yeah. Oh
it's like,
God.
whatever, happens to everyone. So
Yep. I have also made typos in those situations on purpose just to get just to make them dance a little.
yeah, 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 that's great.
So here, all right, back to the question list here, Athenian. I mean, so what has been sort of a notable change in your own personal philosophical outlook, that you've had? I don't know how old you are, nor do I ask, but in the past 10, 15 years, something like that. And how did it come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we don't even have to go back that far.
Hmm.
Just within the last 3 years or so, I would have to say, oh my God, I'm sort of drawing a blank at where to even begin, because I've had so many, I've learned so many things from a number of my mutuals on Twitter, that I never would have guessed. I would say probably, at least related to my own content, uh, the biggest change of thought that I've had is that, the great books aren't necessarily for everyone.
Hmm.
Uh, when I would love to see education reformed, and my area of expertise is philosophy, which is centered around great books, reading great books, especially. With the idea that we still have much to learn from those. We haven't necessarily progressed or anything just because we have better technology. And so when I was right out of graduate school, I thought the best thing in the world would be to help with some of these charter school initiatives that are specializing in the great books. Because I thought it would be so great, right? Like I look back in my own life and I'm like, man, if I had just been reading a lot of these earlier, I'd
Yeah.
be so much further. But what I found is that has disastrous consequences, because it's always easy for us to look back and say, it's the counterfactual imagination, right? We
Yeah.
look back and say, man, it would have been so great. But then you see what's happening with a lot of these young kids who are reading those books, and when you have this the thing about the youth is that, what makes them great, but what also makes them very dangerous, is that they're very spirited, right? They still have that zeal for life. They want to be a part of something larger than themselves, which is great. But if you educate them in things where they've been reading Plato, Dostoevsky, these kinds of things, then they get used to thinking that they already have answers to like the fundamental questions, and they take that with them into their activism that's everywhere now, and so they become very closed-minded very quickly. And so I think a much better approach is not necessarily reading great books at the secondary level, but reading good books, right? I think that would probably be a lot better. And so that would be the largest one. I know it doesn't sound very sexy when you say it, but it would absolutely revolutionize secondary education, especially with a lot of the charter schools and private schools.
And what are the good books?
This is going to be things like Orson Welles, right? Let's see, Aldous Huxley, these people.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the kind of stuff like a Plato or Dostoevsky, where they're literally wrestling with belief or disbelief in the divine. That's very dangerous because young people are already looking for reasons not to believe or to justify whatever sexual inclinations or what have you that they already have. So leave those for college, right? Let them deal with that at college, and quite frankly, with better qualified professors, at least used to be, because that's another thing I found is that most of the secondary teachers that teach these great books, they're not even qualified to teach them. And I don't say that in any kind of with any kind of personal animus or anything, but I mean it's just you don't ask someone to build you something if they don't have the proper qualifications, right, with engineering or something like that. And the same thing with education. You don't necessarily want people teaching these great books of philosophy when they don't really understand philosophy or anything. But that, let's set that aside because that's not very sexy. That doesn't draw the attention or anything. The race question or something like that would probably be better. I mean, without going too extreme or anything like that, I would certainly say that ever since like 2016 and then going into like especially 2020 with George Floyd, I would definitely say that my thoughts on all of that have been very much galvanized because I think that unless and until we see people, as they like to be referred to as people of color, unless and until we see them speaking out about all this insanity, then I'm perfectly fine with going along with what they have to say about what, or at least what their most vocal people have to say, and what the white leftists say is, they want all kinds of reparations and stuff. And so if they're going to continue down that road without people of color speaking out against it, then I'll say, okay, I want reparations for having to deal with all your nonsense. The way you're burning down cities and things like that. I want reparations for all that. The way you ruin inner city schools, the way you ruin all kinds of stuff. So give me reparations. And if I can't have them, then separate from me the way you guys want to separate from us. So that would probably be considered by most in the audience, I guess, a big deal or something like that. So although I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's quite obvious. But
well, I mean, gosh, when the city started burning, when you had Minneapolis was like on fire, and you had that classic meme on Fox News that says fiery but mostly peaceful protest. It's like, what is going on here? I mean, I was in Seattle, and we could see smoke from downtown. There were cop cars, sirens blaring, people marching in the streets. All of the shops were boarded up afterwards. Tons of people went out of business, and this was during COVID, I think, if I remember correctly, and it was absolutely insane to me, that there was not the political leadership to say this is out of freaking control, like this is wrong. The absolute silence from a huge swath of the political leadership is out, and it's still going on, really, right? Like you're still having lootings of these stores where the store and just theft in general in Portland.
Yeah.
And they're closing down major box stores, Walmart slaving, because you have a number of prosecutors that just refuse to use the force of the state, use the justice system to stop the behavior.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
my
they're using the justice system to deliberately make it worse. I would argue, and you're
it
right.
sort of seems like that.
Yeah, I mean,
And it's strange credulity to like imagine that it's being done on purpose, but it sure seems to be.
yeah, I mean, it's one of those, what are the kind of the crossing of the Rubicon moment where you have to ask yourself, look, I personally never give credit to things that can just as easily be explained by incompetence. But the
Yeah.
level of incompetence that we're seeing is so enormous. You have to think to yourself, this is deliberate. But yeah, I mean, I guess I would say another thing too, another big shift, I guess, in my own thought, would be, for instance, like the homelessness.
Yeah.
I used to look where I live. There are enormous amounts of homeless people, and I see them every day at the gas stations and also like at my gym because, and it's terrible, right? I feel very, very bad for these people, but uh, it is so bad that you have to ask yourself. Everyone should ask themselves. Um, we are we tend to default by being bleeding hearts and wanting so desperately to give them like a handout, like a $5 here or something like that. When now with this explosion that, well, it's maybe not even an explosion, maybe we're just only seeing it now because of COVID, right? Because everyone was wondering, where did the homeless people go that were in the subways and things like that, and it turns out they were setting them all up in hotels and things. People really need to ask themselves, what good does it really do to be someone else's shoulder for them to cry on, right? If they're not going to be bettering themselves. And I think that's going to be something that certainly, like, as you were saying, like in Seattle, certainly in Los Angeles, and I mean, all of these major cities, it's really all of them, really. People just have to ask themselves, what we have been doing is obviously not working. It's not even remotely working. So cease and desist. Everything tried up to this point, and let's have some new ideas on the board. And don't let any of those new ideas include this kind of bleeding heart sympathy, because our country needs to exhibit what would otherwise be called tough love. Uh, that's the only thing that's going to get us through all of the various. Look, any single one of these problems that we're dealing with right now, in and of itself, would be a national crisis. All of them together, well, that's how a nation gets destroyed within a span of just a couple years, very easily, very easily. So yeah, I mean, I guess I would sort of add that one to the list.
Yeah, I mean that is it rings home with me loudly. The it's and you have these cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle. I mean, they're the ones that I'm most familiar with, being on the West Coast, and you have massive amounts of funds and support. And I've that go to these populations, and what seems to be happening is that if you think about the populations like pigeons or whatnot, right? You start feeding the pigeons, and what happens? You get more pigeons, and as you were saying, that shoulder to lean on. It's not to go back to good old Jesus. It's like you're not teaching a man to fit. You're not. You're just providing handouts, and you're not teaching the man to fish. Like you need to. There has to be a commitment to stop being like you're being in order to be deserving of that forgiveness and that help.
Yeah, we can phrase this in a way that sort of goes back to Jordan Peterson with the anonymity and things.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy from Princeton who also takes a hard line like he does and calls anonymous people cowards and stuff. And of course,
Yeah.
in his if you go to the the main part of his account, his banner profile picture is him hugging Cornel West while bragging about being uncancelable. It's like, okay, so you're publicly hugging the left's favorite Negro, bragging that you yourself are not cancelable. Okay, so I don't believe you. But the thing about all of these problems and what we would otherwise call tough love is that you have to remove the incentives, all of the incentives that would otherwise lessen the blow, right? Um,
Yes.
so people need to know that if they're going to go down that road, it's going to be absolutely as bad as you could possibly imagine. And to relate this sort of to the Peterson thing with anonymity, that's nothing more than what the left is doing with this so-called cancel culture, right? That's why, for instance, why I'm anonymous and things like that. What do they do to people who are anonymous but want to speak their own political opinions? Well, they would happily celebrate them losing everything, literally everything. They would happily celebrate them losing their home, losing their job, losing the ability to put food on the table of their kids. And I mean, look, they would happily celebrate their deaths. We've seen this. We've literally
Yeah.
seen this on Twitter. They happily celebrate when people of different political opinion die. And so I think, and so it's really just taking a page from their own playbook. The people on the left who would be in such shock of how I would describe tough love, uh, they're so moronic that they wouldn't even realize that that's exactly what they're doing with this whole thing of cancel culture of theirs. So I mean, I'm not a firm. I don't believe in this nonsense of proportional response. If someone strikes you, you strike back with everything you've got, so that they never even think about striking you again.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they're doing with cancel culture. So I would love to see that kind of attitude taken towards a lot of these problems. For instance, like the immigration, the fact that we don't have a southern border. Same thing with a kind of absolutely zero tolerance with activism in academia. I mean, these problems can all be solved. It's just that people have to simply have the will, the resolve to want to solve them. Right? They have to unknot their stomachs to
Yeah.
the fact that that solving them is not going to be pleasant. In fact, it's going to be extremely unpleasant. And most people just can't get past that extremely unpleasant because
Yeah.
we've lived in such a prosperous society for so long that we honestly believe that there are solutions that are not unpleasant. So,
And I have dinner conversations, with friends about things like this, and that's exactly the point that I make, is that you have to have a situation where people understand the world is going to be terrible if you go down these roads. If you come across the border, there's not going to be free phones and food and whatnot. If you decide to live in a tent, like terrible things, you might run out of food. Like these it will not be comfortable. Like and if that doesn't happen, it's completely obvious that people will simply choose to live off of the handouts that they have from the bleeding hearts of people who just keep giving them things and subsidizing the degenerate lifestyles that they're living. Um, I saw a recent news report about that something like 30-40% of all shoplifting in New York City was attributable within a calendar year or something like that to like 300-400 individuals who each were arrested like 20 times and let out because it was just shoplifting. It's like how in the, and if they've gotten 20 times, they're doing 10x that.
one of the things that I like to say, and a mutual of mine who's a really, really thoughtful guy in South Africa,
Oh,
what he says is, he says, um, what the West in general, but America in particular, don't realize. You always, and we hear this all the time. We hear people saying it just can't get any worse, right? It just can't get
it
any
always
worse.
get worse.
And what he said is, he goes, that kind of mentality uh, has never been outside of its own country, because He says, come to South Africa. You'll find out real quickly that most people have no idea how bad it can get.
Yeah.
If you want to find out how bad it can get, then just stay on that same road you're on by saying that it can't get any worse. Because I can assure you that saying that it can't get any worse will in fact lead to cannibalism down the road when food supplies run out, when the entire country is in obvious anarchy. And I think he's right. I get very angry when when I hear a lot of people on the right, the so-called normies, when they say things like it can't get any worse, or something has to change. It's like, well, okay, that's the problem right there. You're the problem by thinking that. You need to realize that it can, in fact, get so much worse that every single thing you love will be gone, right? Gone.
Yeah.
And until people get that through their heads, we're going to continue down into this free fall spiral here.
And I don't so much mind, the people who don't want to think about what needs to be done and not take part in things, but it's also get out of the way. It's stop, like, let the adults deal with this, because the lunatics have been running the insane asylum for too long, and if you don't have the stomach for it and you don't want to hear about it, well, then stay inside. And until that occurs, it's like, this is another thing that Peterson clued me on with, into like the Gulag Archipelago and what happened in communist Russia, where it did become that bad. You had even the supporters of the regime, true believers in the Communist Party, were shipped off to gulags in conditions that I don't think I can't, beyond words how terrible those things were.
Yeah, that's the great danger, is that all of these solutions or these recognitions of the problem are right there for us in these great books, right? Just like with Gulag Archipelago, and I mean any number of his books, Solzhenitsyn, that is. Same thing with Dostoevsky. These things are there for us to learn from. The problem is we're not learning from them, right? People just sort of, they might own the book, let it sit on their shelf, and occasionally when they don't want to binge watch Netflix on their comfortable couch, they might flip it open and read it and be like, oh, wow, that's pretty interesting. That's pretty frightening. And that gets back to sort of my whole point about how it is that the great books, if you take them with the seriousness that they deserve, they can, in fact, and they should be absolutely revolutionary in your life, because these people are not making this up. And to the extent that some of these things are fiction, it's based upon real history, and history that's not very old, right? It's just right. It's just right behind us. And we have so very much to learn from this, and yet that's the problem. And I'm like you. I completely understand the people who have so much to lose, right? They might be in a position where if they speak out, they lose their job, and then if they lose their job, they've got kids that'll suffer, a wife, right? And so it's easy for me as a guy who's not married and doesn't have kids to talk about these kinds of things that need to be done. But at the same time, it goes back to what you just said. No reason to begrudge them. They just need to get out of the way, right? Which in many cases means keep your fucking mouth shut. If you're going to be voicing your stupid ass opinions on Twitter or something like that, right? Support the people who are doing the requisite fighting, right? Just support us, and just let that be it, right?
Yeah, I mean, even I'm not anonymous, and it does, even this conversation, I think about it. It's like it does make me slightly concerned. I don't know how else to be, though. It's one of those things where it's like, somebody, if I'm not saying something about this, I feel complicit. I feel like I am not speaking the truth, and Dostoevsky, I believe, addresses that quite well. That if you live in the world of lies, then it's going to come after you eventually.
Yeah, I mean, but that's a good thing, though, right? Because I mean, that's in many respects, that's someone's conscience having the required effect upon them, right? to feel bad that they're not doing something. And there's certainly always something that can be done. So, for instance, like even in a situation of someone who has so much to lose, that they don't want to risk speaking out. Well, okay, take a more active involvement in the education that your kids are getting, right? Make sure that whatever school they're involved in is not indoctrinating them, which is probably going to be the case. And, I mean, there's always something that can be done, right? There's always something that can be done. A particularly toxic relationship to get out of, getting into shape, getting into better shape. All of these things are ways in which people can take the chaos that's going on around them and reharness that, refocus that to be more productive, as opposed to whatever they might be doing, which is to say possibly going insane. Because we watch the news, right? I mean, you watch the news and you will go insane, especially if you don't feel like that you have any control over it. And the point is that you can gain control over it in the various aspects of your life that you want to benefit, right? Just channel that anger, channel that frustration, and go forth, right? That's the thing.
All right. How do you think the loss of these educational institutions, and I know this is a big question for you, contributes to the decline of society, and what steps can we take to prevent this from happening?
Just noticed how large your shoulders are. You're a lifting man. I appreciate that.
I'm not really, but I do jujitsu, and I'm like 6'1", 240. So
yeah, there you go.
I'm not that fat. I'm a little fat, but
no, that's cool. No, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up. It's everything. There's a reason why we say that the kids are our future, because they literally are. And what most people don't understand is that it doesn't take many years. We're not talking decades. It doesn't take many years to lose an entire country because you've lost control of the education. That goes back to my handle on Twitter, right? Athenian Stranger. In Plato's longest dialogue, the laws, that's the primary character, the primary interlocutor. And the principal argument that he makes throughout the longest dialogue of Plato is that if you lose the institutions of education, you've lost your country. You can still call it a constitutional republic. You can call it anything you want, but the way it's actually working and operating is exactly what's going on in the institutions of education. And one way that's helpful to think of it is consider a third grader or a fourth grader at this point right now. In the last 3 to 4 years, all of this insanity, they've been raised to think it's normal, which is to say the masks, the transgender bathrooms, all of that kind of stuff. And let's not fool ourselves. If there is just one transgender bathroom in a school, that's all it takes to make it to where no one is allowed to criticize it. And in fact, just the opposite. They're supposed to understand that it's normal, that it's okay, right? Okay, so that's a generation that's lost. And generations happen very quickly. So for instance, when someone goes from elementary to middle school, right? That's from 5th grade to 6th grade. When someone goes from middle school to high school, 8th grade to 9th grade. When someone goes from high school to college, right? All of these things are happening simultaneously. And so as those things are occurring, those are literally generations that are passing before us. And they've been living through all of this. And for them, they've already been trained to think that it's normal. Now, we can hope that their parents have corrected for that, but doubtful, right? Very doubtful. And so that's the amazing influence, the frightening influence that the demise of education has had upon all of this. If you want to see the most insane activists, simply look at whatever your local high school is. Just look to see what the high school students are doing. It's not even in. It used to be the case that people were worried that they'd send their high school kids off to college, and some crackpot professor would send them back home with a head full of these insane ideas. Now what's happening is that the students are so indoctrinated by their high school teachers that they're going off to college demanding more, right? Demanding more. And so that's how amazingly inverted and insane all of this has become just over the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, I've a 9-month-old daughter now, so about that time of month, um, to start calling her 9 months, and it one of the few things that truly worries me is the idea that I would like to homeschool her, but I don't know if that's going to be a possibility or not. Is that she is going to get ideas in her head that and end up not liking me, right? It's and and I don't know how I would deal with that, because it's on the one hand, it's like you want to have a good relationship with your daughter. On the other hand, you have to speak the truth, and like you don't. It's like, how do you counteract the fact that you have a body of people that she's spending 6, 7, 8 hours a day with, possibly more time than she spends with me, in turn, who influence her behavior. Because I mean, I'm a big fan of the ideas of Rene Girard in terms of like the mimetic desire, and that children are the are the people who are most copying of at any stage of their life, and that the people that you have children around are the most important people for their development of character, and how they're going to behave and who they're going to model themselves after. So this idea of sending my kids off to mimic people who have absolutely insane ideas is just an anathema to me.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite lines in Aristotle's Poetics, is where he says that man is by nature the most imitative of all creatures, and he says they do their first learning through imitation as children. Right.
Yeah.
That I take to simply be true, and obviously true.
Yeah.
That's why it's so dangerous when we see this stuff like the drag queen story hour and stuff like that. But your larger concern is exactly correct, and this is something I've witnessed. I can't even tell you how many times. You now have, through the influence of teachers upon their students who are in secondary school, like elementary, middle, and high school, they're telling their own parents, "You can't say that. That's racist."
Yeah.
I have personally witnessed on dozens of occasions, children accusing their own parents of being racist because of whatever it is that they're saying. And the thing about it is that as the adults, they don't really see it as that big of a deal. They're like, I mean, it's just a teenager or something. I mean, it's just, and so they let it slide. They let it go. They don't even realize that same mentality that's accusing their own parents of being a racist or a bigot or homophobe or whatever, that same mentality is also being, as I like to say, farted out all over social media by these kids underneath the roofs that the parents are paying for, through the devices that the parents are paying for. And I mean, I like to use a reference from Homer. I call it the Cyclopean household. The Cyclops and Homer, they eat their own. They're cannibals. And so what's happening is that the children are now cannibalizing their own parents, and it's happening by way of the indoctrination of the teachers. And let's be perfectly clear, this is something that's just always true, even under the best circumstances. Heroes have no glory at home, right? The people who know us the most don't really think that we're all that great. They see us, right? They see us fart. They see us burp. They see us, naked or whatnot. They know all the bad things about us. But yet when it comes to, for instance, that cool teacher at school, they really want to impress that one, right? And so it's very difficult for parents to compete with that. Now, that's another hobby of mine, is getting much more involved in the education of fathers and sons by reading the great books and stuff. That'll be a whole section on my forthcoming website, because that can be corrected. You absolutely can be a hero to your children. Absolutely. The problem is that we have a crisis of manliness and fatherhood in America, certainly in the West more generally. But that's the thing. So yeah.
What would you say to people? Because I've heard this before, I've said it before, but the criticism of that comment can be, hey, any time in history that you look back people are saying that the men aren't real men anymore. How do you know now is different than those historical? I mean, I think I saw an example of Julius Caesar was talking about like when Julius was coming up, like the elders were commenting that they were wearing too floppish of robes or what have you.
Yeah, that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the youth are always spirited. The youth always rebel, right? I mean,
Yes.
This is very, very explicit, even in Plato's laws. He attributes it to the Athenian stranger, attributes it to a primordial madness. He says the whole reason that children cry and need to jump around and constantly demand change is because the nature of the soul is just naturally chaotic. And there's a theme of this that runs through the great books throughout the tradition of, so for instance, Maimonides refers to the flame of the youth. And so that's always going to be true, that the youth are always going to be looking for reasons to rebel in some way or another. The onus on parents is to make sure that their experience teaches them that there is something of great value to be gained from the tradition, from the way of life of their fathers and their parents, right? And that's something I see sort of in my own life. So, for instance, when I look at the youth today, they do stupid shit that I would never have done or said to my own parents, and I wasn't even a good kid. And so, just from my own life experience, I would say, okay, sure, you can point to other times and say, well, that's always been the case. But I'm telling you right now, these kids today are quite obviously, manifestly, far more disrespectful than just the generation of mine, right? Just my generation before them, and I'm not that old. So, and again, I don't consider myself to be exceptional in any way whatsoever. I mean, it's just sort of middle class. Wasn't even very good in school originally, and I was always getting into trouble. But there were things that not even I would do, right, to say to my own parents, that these kids today just, I mean, they think absolutely nothing of it. And it's funny, right? Because I mean, it's sort of like, you know, it's like the old Muppets, right? That sit up in the balcony and are just, they're the old men and they're just clowning and mocking and everyone's so, ah, ha, ha, right? And so, I think of like the younger generation looking up at me saying, you're just that old Muppet, that's, complaining about everything. And again, this is when I just go back and I say, well, I mean, they can say that all they want. It's not an argument. It's just a slogan. The argument will always come out in my favor, I'm certain, because they lack experience. They don't have the experience to match what they think is knowledge. I do have those things. I have the knowledge and the life experience to match up. That's in many ways the experience is what informed the knowledge, right? It's not some stupid shit that I read in a book by, what is his name? Henry Rogers, right? Stage name Ibram X. Kendi. That's his real name is Henry Rogers, right? That's how much of a clown he is. So they write this crap in these books, and they want to talk about all that, and I just say, well, that's fine that you've farted that out in those books, and you're a well-known author for it. It's not reality. It's not how the world works. I can promise you. And so we have all these younger kids who really think that they know the way the world works, and life's a bitch. It's going to teach them one way or another. So we'll see, and that would be the response that I would say to that. I mean, there was I tweeted something about how if men would just take fatherhood far more seriously, we could solve so very many problems that we're all facing today in this insanity. And then, of course, I had people come out and say, well, 80% of divorces are from, women want those. And I read that and I just think to myself, I'm like, look, you can want to blame the women all you want, but that just makes you less of a man. The fact is, you're a goddamn man. Okay. Take control of your house, right? Take fucking control of your house, take control of your life, and take responsibility for shit. I don't want to hear people pointing out that it's, women this and women that. And I say that as someone who loves to dunk on the squad, right? Because we do currently, right, AOC and all those worthless cunts. Uh, the we do live under a gynocracy, right? I mean, let's be perfectly clear about that.
Yeah.
But what I argue about that is that the gynocracy was only made possible through weak men, and that's why the focus should always be on stronger men, more manly men. That's going to solve it. Raising good sons who know what to look for in a wife that they want to have the rest of their life with and have children with, and things like that. That is how you fix the cycle of generations, right? With good men.
Yeah, every time, and I have to remind myself of the kind of things that you are saying, not infrequently, right? As a married man, it's like I want to blame my wife for certain things, and I think, sometimes I think to myself, oh gosh, if she would only blah blah blah, and then I think to myself, it's like, okay, I'm a man, I'm an adult, I'm responsible for outcomes, so no matter what happens, it's on me. And it reframes, and I really, in many ways, credit Jocko Willink to searing this one in my head, where he has this book Extreme Ownership, where he really talks about this, and and I think women can get a lot out of this too. But it's the idea of, you are responsible for outcomes no matter what happens. If you're truly a leader, if you're truly a person who should be looked at, and as we're putting in the frame that we're putting that, as a man, like that is what makes a man, is to be able to get the results that are required, and not blaming others along the way.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I like to phrase it is this, and I don't know if this can even be taught. I think some people simply have it and some don't. You just have to ask yourself, whatever it is that has happened, uh, did it happen on your watch, right?
Yeah.
And if it happened on your watch, that's all that matters. Say, okay, I got to own this, right? I'm not going to pass the buck on this one. It happened on my watch. Even if it's completely unfair or something like that, doesn't matter. Own it and just do what needs to be done to ensure that it's not going to happen again. It's that simple. Now, I say it's that simple, but it's also extremely hard, right?
Yes.
Because that's the thing about time and life itself, is that very often, sort of going back to that very first question you asked me, right? What has been the biggest thing that you've changed your ideas on? What happens when the largest thing you've had to change your ideas on involves, for instance, the most personal, intimate relationship that you might have with someone, right?
Yeah.
And simply addressing it would be an enormous fight, or could possibly even threaten the relationship altogether. And most people would just rather avoid it and say, you know
Yeah.
what, that's just how they're going to be. And to that, I mean, on the one hand, I'm understanding, uh, but on the other hand, I see people who are living miserable lives, people who are in unhappy marriages, and they say they stay together just for the kids or whatnot. But the fact is, look, uh, if it happened on your watch, do you want to fix it or not? Because if you don't, I mean, the one way I can guarantee that it won't get fixed is if you don't address it, right? I mean, it's just gonna,
Yeah.
it sets a precedence, right? Um, and very often that's how people are very manipulative in their own relationships. They're always trying to push the edge. So if they can get away with a little bit more, then once they've gotten away with once you let someone get away with something once, the precedent has been set, and they will do it again. And in fact, they will complain if you complain the next time they do it. They say, "Well, you didn't have a problem last time I did it."
Yeah.
And that's the very basic psychology I took with me going into the whole COVID stuff. Is that once you allow the government to do things that it knows it shouldn't do, that it knows are wrong, I can promise you they're going to do it again. I can
Oh, and
absolutely
that's
promise you they will do it again. So,
and I one of my mutuals, shout out to Jason Bradley, everybody shook. He writes about this in terms of what people thought COVID was about. His suggestion is that COVID wasn't about selling vaccines at one level. It was about testing the limits of compliance.
I'm I'm willing to agree with that 100%. Um, I mean, and whether it was planned or not, um,
Right.
you know, it,
Opportunistic or not, right? Like,
exactly. Yeah, it's literally irrelevant whether it was planned or
yeah,
not, because the fact is, whether it was the local, the state, or the federal level. It happened. And so you just know the people that got away with it are thinking, well, you know what, deal with it. It's like that piece of shit who recently died, Harry Reid, that guy that was in the Senate forever.
Yeah.
When he lied about Mitt Romney, who is another piece of shit, and I don't, who cares, right? But right before he died, like one of his last interviews or something, they asked him, they said, do you regret, uh, you know, lying about Romney or whatever and ruining whatever his chance was in the presidential campaign? And Harry Reid just laughed and he says, well, it worked, didn't it? And so that's what people have to get that through their fucking head, is that's what even your local politician, who probably has no power, that's what they're all thinking. That's what they think of you. It's what they think of all of us, is they don't really care, as long as it worked, got away with it. And so having that at least understanding of realpolitik,
Right.
could solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, and it is that, and it's funny that you bring that up, because this was part of my Slack conversation that I was mentioning earlier, where I had one of the guys on the chat was saying, it's like, well, it's really wrong that these politicians don't look out for the interests of all of their constituents, and I'm like, it's really wrong. This is literally what I typed, because I'm kind of a troll, as he pointed out. It's literally wrong that if I eat cake, I'm going to get fat. It's just like, these are just both the things the way that they are, right? Like, they're playing, like, politicians play a team game, right? Like, and we all play team games to an extent. And I don't even necessarily blame politicians for playing team games. I think there's somebody I was listening to was like, actually it was you, it was your space just now, was talking about how the lamb thinks that the falcon is a bad animal because the falcon is tearing it apart and eating it, right? But the falcon's just being a falcon, right? You can't blame it for being what it is. And that's all these politicians are. Like, it's the nature of people who, and what you hope is that the political systems that you ascribe to help balance out and neutralize the coming up of tyrants and people doing really terrible things, right? People are going to do bad things, but we're going to try to minimize that as much as possible by putting in the right structures and controls, and hopefully cooperate in a way that's good enough for enough people.
Yeah, I mean, look, on the one hand, what that person in the chat said, you want, right? You want people to have that sense of injustice, right? You want them
Yeah.
to say, because that's a very principled moral claim that he's making. Is like, how they should do this, right? A should, right? So on the one hand, you want people to have that approach to things, but on the other hand, what you don't want, and this is the problem with the left, is you don't want people who are so engrossed in the should that they don't even realize the is, right. I mean, you can say something shouldn't happen all day, while it's literally happening in front of your eyes, right.
Yes.
And so you need people to be aware of some of the most basic elements of human nature. And that seems to be what, for instance, what the left is always getting wrong, is that they conflate the should with what they want human nature to really be. That's why they're so emotive about things, so emotional, radically emotional about things. Uh, once you've come to terms with, once you've made peace with the fact that people do have evil in them, right? I mean, they're certainly capable of evil. Once you reconcile yourself to that, politics becomes much more doable. It
and,
becomes much more understandable.
and good and bad, right and wrong, evil, what have you, it has a point of view. It's not just like you have two opposing armies, or two cities or what have you, going to battle, two families in a rivalry. And on one hand, the people who are winning or doing the attacking and winning the fight, the opposing force is going to call them evil or bad, and they're doing us wrong. But the people being defended by those attackers think that they're good. And so I point that out only because, like, I feel like one of the things that people get naively wrong quite a bit is the fact that life is a team game to an extent, and that nobody, if you care about everybody equally, you effectively care about nobody.
I would agree with that 100%. That's the problem, is when you have we call it today humanitarianism,
Yes.
knowing no borders, right?
Yes.
People want to pat themselves on the back for having a medical degree and traveling to South Africa to help black babies,
Yep.
as opposed to just staying here in the States and going, down any boulevard in Los Angeles and so, just setting up shop there. Um, when it turns out, I mean, look, this is like that famous line. Well, I don't know if it's famous, but that great, what is it, that animated movie, The Incredibles, where the bad guy says at the very end, he says, because when everyone's special, no one is.
Right.
And that's what happens. And that's why I'm very big on things like family and a people, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to take a pride, not just, for instance, in your own family, but your people. Because when you don't, when you do, like, I don't know, Barack Obama was famous for saying this, that, there was nothing exceptional about America. So let's translate that properly. In other words, don't be proud of your own people, right?
Yeah.
My response would be, go fuck yourself. Because what happens when you have a people that doesn't even look in the mirror and say, you know what, I like what I see. What you have is exactly what we have right now. You have people looking in the mirror and hating what they see. They hate their own
Yeah.
people. The West is currently engaged in suicide. Literally, well, not literally. Well, yeah, literally, I would say. The West presently hates itself probably worse than its enemies do. The same people over in the goddamn Middle East who would celebrate cutting our head off with a pocket knife. They couldn't be happier looking at what America's doing and saying, look at those morons. They're sitting around hating themselves more than we do. Let's just pull up a chair, sit back, watch someone put some popcorn over the fire, and we'll just have a great time watching them kill themselves. Because that's what happens when you don't have pride in your people. And it's certainly also what happens at the far more local level when you don't have pride in your own family. Just to be proud of the fact that, your father is your father, or your mother is your mother, right? These are mine. These are my people. I came from them. We're going in the far opposite direction, saying that, the very reason you shouldn't be attached to them is because, they're yours and you're nothing special. There's nothing special about us. And I punch back at that very hard and say, well, okay, good luck with that approach to world relations, because I can promise you there will be a people who's very proud of themselves, and they will happily overtake you, take everything that you love, make sure that every single thing that you think is right will never happen, and they will end you. They will end everything you love, and they will do it with a smile, and they'll probably celebrate afterwards. And so that's another thing people need to get through their fucking heads. Yeah.
So, yes, so this brings me to, I'm going to kind of pivot very, very slightly on this to the nature of truth. Okay, because I think this idea that this meme, and the Dawkins sense of the word meme, is it's a idea that spreads, and ideas in combination with each other. You can think of them as like sets of ideas. Like, I think the Bible is like a set of ideas, as is the Quran, or Hindu teaching or whatever. It's like these are sort of like chords of notes. If a meme is a note, then the Bible is kind of a chord or a symphony, so to speak, and they travel together. And what it seems to have happened is, like, in the West, we've gotten this idea attached to the Western ideas that these are bad, and that, like, bad idea keeps that association of negativity with this set of ideas keeps people from wanting to spread it. And ideas die when they spread, when they don't spread, right? Like it's just like any population. So in a way, and this is I think I probably got this from Peterson at first, where, like, you can think of ideas and memes just like genes, where they have and they use people as their vessels in order to spread. And the ones that spread the most in a particular environment we can think of as having the highest degree of fitness, right? Because they're very fit for that environment, so they multiply. And that truth itself is derived from an idea is true when it spreads and people act as if it's true, and when nobody stops believing it, it's not true anymore. So I think the thing that you're talking about here is that you literally have this sort of like cancerous idea of the immorality of Western thought that is leading its host to try to kill it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot going on there. I mean, I'd have to think about it to get down into the particulars there, but the way that I would phrase this in philosophy is call it one of those foundational questions, one of the grounding questions. But just saying that alone already provides a kind of answer, because this thing that we say grounds something also goes by the name of truth. And so, what happens when you don't, I mean, it's weird to even use this because our language ends up being our biggest obstacle. But I was going to say, what happens when one doesn't subscribe to that? But then what does it even mean to say one subscribes to something, right? I mean, it's like...
I would say that you act it out. When you subscribe to an idea as true, it manifests itself through you.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I would say I agree with that. But again, there's a lot of moving parts there. I'm just trying to think of all the ways in which this appears in an extremely academic setting. So yeah, I mean, I'd have to think about this a little bit further. But I do agree, though, that, and this is something that's very philosophical. So, for instance, Plato Socrates says, and this is something that you see in Aristotle as well, that one doesn't really know something if one's not doing it, right?
Yes.
To say that you know, for instance, what virtue is, if you really know it, then it's so convincing to you that you're doing it, right? To say that you know something but you're not doing it means that you really don't know it. And that's when Plato Socrates has this rather hilarious line, which gets very deep. But he says, no one voluntarily chooses to do bad. And it's sort of like, well, look at the world around you, man. It's like I see people voluntarily. And then it gets into a very much a deeper discussion of free will, or well, I wouldn't even say free will, but what it means to actually know simply. That's the way I like to pose this question of truth is, well, what do we mean when we say we know something, right? So in other words, stepping away from the abstraction, right? Because to say, well, truth or justice, or stepping away, that's an abstraction. So stepping away from that and say, well, hold on a second. What exactly do we mean when we say that we know something is true or something? And what you're saying, and again, I'm inclined to agree with this, is that you know it by your experiential contact with it. How it is that you've experienced it in your own life. But yeah, I don't know. That's as you can tell from my response here. The little gray cells in my mind are just sort of they're wanting to go on these deep philosophical rants. I don't want to go that deep or anything, especially.
Well, maybe I'll catch up with you offline about this, or maybe we'll have another online conversation, because this is kind of a soapbox thing for me. Like, it's like for me, it's like this. I don't think it's the idea itself doesn't feel overly original, but the formulation might be in some way. And like, you seemed like the perfect guy to give feedback on it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Let me think about this. And we'll talk about this. We'll talk about this offline. And this could be something that would be a great separate entire episode in itself.
Yeah, and let me I'm going to transition into the trans thing by using it as an example of why I think like the idea of men being able to become women and women being able to become men is it's untrue. In a way, and I mean untrue in a way of why it's immoral. Because if you assume that like morality will lead you to truth, and that um, and, and and truth is something that will persist through generations, if it allows you to win the game of life, and so to speak. The trans thing, where you're sterilizing people, right? And sterilizing people, you don't have more people. A population can't sustain itself if it's not multiplying. Um, how do you think, like, I think I just flubbed that entire transition there. But so what are your thoughts on this entire transgender thing going on with children, and specifically, like, why and how is this being introduced in schools, and like this entire level of secrecy? I mean, we just had in California a school board decision to maintain the secrecy and keep this thing from parents and students. What the hell is going on there?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my things that I have zero tolerance for. The whole issue with trannies in the first place, I think, is just absolutely wrong. Um, these are people with mental disease. It's that simple. Um, and the fact that they're, I don't even know the word. I'm drawing at a loss for how bad I want to describe the behavior of unleashing it upon children is. But this monstrosity of allowing even the discussion of it
Yep.
among children who don't know anything about it. They're literally learning it from them. Put Socrates to death. The official charge was that he was corrupting the youth. And how wonderful that would be if we could institute some tough love again in this country by having policies that were that sharp, that says, look, children are the most innocent and the most vulnerable within our society. If you're going to try to corrupt them, that's going to cost you your life. I would love to see that. That would solve a lot of these problems rather quickly. But that's it's my take on it. So
Life has to get worse for people who want to do bad things.
yeah, it's like what's that Kevin Costner film where the guy says he says just shoot a few, the rest will leave. So, now, hold on. I want to make sure. Let me be perfectly clear. That was a joke. I am by no means advocating violence on this whatsoever. That was an absolute joke.
Nobody's advocating violence whatsoever.
Right.
Although, another joke my father-in-law likes to say, they shoot an asshole every day. You'll never get them all.
That's great. There's a great line in a show that I like to watch. At least the first season of it. I've stopped watching it. I don't really watch TV much. But it's from a show called Mr. In Between, and he's a guy who's been to prison, and he's gotten out, and he's got a kid, and he's just trying to get his life back in order. So he's sort of in between the right path from having been on the wrong path, and he has to attend to anger management, and he ends up beating the shit out of these two young kids that come, they bump into his little girl when he's giving her an ice cream, and they laugh about it. And he's like, "Hey, watch where you're fucking going." And they laugh about it and mock him and mock the little girl for losing her ice cream. So he puts his little girl in the car real quick and goes around the shop and beats the shit out of him. And he has to answer for that. And he says, the guy says, "Do you like hitting people? Is that what's going on?" And he says, "Well, no, not as a general not as a general policy. If I hit someone, I've got a reason for it." And he says, "Well, what was your reason for hitting them?" And he said, "Well, they were being assholes." And the guy says, "The world is full of assholes." And he says, "Yeah, and you know why? Because people let them get away with it." He says, he goes, "You stop letting them get away with it. That'll change." And he's right. I mean, I think he's absolutely right. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I know you've got to get going on Athenian, and I think on that note might be an appropriate ending.
Yeah, this was great. We've got to do this again sometime. We can actually dive into like one particular topic or something like what you were talking about, and really tease it out and everything. And I think that'd be great.
Awesome. I've got another like 3/4, half a page of questions for you that we never got to. So, and yeah, I'd really appreciate doing this again. This was really awesome. And yeah, we'll arrange the spaces so everybody can do a little Q&A after the episode comes out.
Yeah, definitely, man. This will be a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this, and I really appreciate you having me on and stuff. And I would love to do this again. And like you just said, like I was suggesting before, let's do a space. Talk about it, do a little Q&A about all this stuff, and just see where it goes.
Awesome. Appreciate you, brother. Take care.
All right, you too.